Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? This is Finite MTG, and today I am back doing something a little different from normal. I'm actually borrowing an idea I saw in a Jim Davis article, which I'll have linked in the description. Pretty much, so with the Signature Spellbook, it's something that you see coming from Wizards of the Coast in regards to Planeswalkers, but the idea is that real life players can have them too. So I'm going to be going over my 8 choices here for cards that are special or fond to me in some way. So with that, let's move on to number 1 here, Sandwurm Convergence. So I actually loved this card back in Triple Amonkhet Limited. That was the format where people were all over the red-white Exert deck, and because of that, people didn't seem to think that slower controlling ramp decks were a viable archetype, and as a big signal reader, or at least attempted one, I always found myself in that archetype. And a lot of the time that involved getting past a late Sandwurm Convergence. And this card was just the absolute nuts. Making a 5/5 every turn, oh well, maybe you're not safe against flyers with 5/5 tokens on the ground. The card has that covered as well. So yeah, very, very nice card. I don't know if I've lost a game where I resolved it. One of my favorites for sure. Next up here we have Urza Academy Headmaster. This one's a little more anecdotal. So few friends and I were doing an unsanctioned draft, and the store accidentally gave us one additional pack, and we had already left the store at this point, so there was no point in trying to return it or anything. And without a clear way to split the pack, I suggested that whoever wins the draft should be the one to open and keep the contents. My friends agreed, and sure enough, somehow I ended up undefeated. And right before I opened the pack, I was saying, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if there were an Urza in here, right? In the one pack that I actually got to keep from that. And sure enough, that is the one card in that rare slot. Really, really happy to get the Urza out of this one. This is definitely a nice memory for me. All right, next up here, we have slightly less powerful card than the last two in Wild Ceratok. 4 mana for a 4/3. The only text on it is flavor text. It's a Rhino, I suppose. But this card was just something that I really was fond of. I played a lot of Guilds of Ravnica Sealed, which I thought was much more enjoyable than Guilds of Ravnica Draft. And this card people thought was just about unplayable. People really don't seem to like vanilla creatures unless they're massively overstated, but this thing was a totally solid role player for me. Won a lot of games just by having one more creature to get in some extra damage. And of course, there is a really fun meme that I was able to do. I got this thing above 20 power. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was 22, but I'll have a picture of that in the description as well. All right, so another nicely statted card. This one is effectively vanilla. The 3 colorless mana adding to the mana pool, I don't think that was relevant a single time for me. But yeah, I believe this one was from Ultimate Masters, and this is where people were trying to do really crazy, dirtily stuff and cheat Eldrazi into play. Anyway, this is a card that I saw people sleep on just too many times, in my opinion. 3 mana, 3/3 is always a card you're going to want in the attacking decks. You're not going to find a card too much better statted than that. Nice and easy to cast, leaves you open. I made a video where the title was Cathodion is Leovold with Upside, because, I mean, Leovold, so much harder to cast, right? Must be a worse card. And that's just a small testament of how much I really enjoy Cathodion as a Magic card. All right, so next up, oh man, this is another really, really great one. Healer's Headdress. So this thing looks like a relatively simple equipment. You're going to pump the toughness of the equipped creature. You're going to be able to prevent some damage there. But when you're in a deck with a lot of white lands, you're suddenly able to start re-equipping that Healer's Headdress and just make combat almost impossible for your opponent by equipping, preventing a damage to something, re-equipping, doing the same thing, maybe leaving it on a creature to give it a lasting +0/+2. Not to mention you can just block with one equipped creature, effectively prevent 3 damage, the +0/+2, and the prevent 1 damage. So yeah, Healer's Headdress This is a card I loved, specifically in Chaos Draft. This is where I found myself picking it up a lot. I think there was a season where over 4 decks I had this thing, and it was always a really solid performer for me. So with that, moving on to the next one. Another card I love specifically in Chaos Draft. This one is a little bit lesser known in terms of the tricks you can do with it. I actually learned about the tricks you can do with this card, I believe, from a flashback primer. So Shuriken, if you don't know, it looks like it deals 2 damage to target creature, but the cost is you kind of have to throw it over to your opponent. How the card actually works is, so if you're able to equip it from creature 1 you control to creature 2 you control, if you hold priority and activate that first ability, so what'll happen is the Shuriken will deal damage to the opponent's creature, right? Because that's the last ability on the stack, it'll resolve first. Then that equip ability will resolve, then it comes over to your creature. Even though the Shuriken is still controlled by the opponent, it's attached to your creature. And so then, if you have a creature with toughness greater than 2, or even if you don't, if you just really want that Shuriken back, you can activate it from that second creature that you targeted, and bam, suddenly you're the controller of it. So it's a kind of complicated workaround to mitigate the downside on this card, but this is something that I feel I've become associated with. I've explained this to countless people. I have a YouTube video on it, one where I use the card. So yeah, another really fun card that I am a big fan of. All right, next up here, this card definitely falls into the underrated camp, Tangle Wire. So this is a card that I actually used to think was very bad, and that's because I grew up on the Newmont School of Magic, if you will, and I saw Newmont do so many Vintage Cube drafts, and I don't know if he ever picked this card, and eventually I started seeing this card show up in a lot of the Trophy Leaders decks, and I was thinking, okay, well they must know something that he doesn't, right? Or at least something that I don't. And I slowly started putting this thing in my aggressive decks, and man, this card is insane. I prefer it to Armageddon effects. It's cheaper, it's colorless. I really like the flexibility it gives you, and a lot of the time the opponent just doesn't have enough permanents to get that same flexibility, which is a really nice way of breaking the symmetry in my opinion. So with that, moving on to the last one here already, Frantic Inventory. This is not a card I've cast a very large number of times, but it is in the most recent core set here, so I thought I would just mention it for that. This card is really, really nice, especially if you compare it to something like Take Inventory. So the first copy is pretty anemic, you're effectively cycling, but by the second copy, you're getting 2 mana Divination and instant speed. Granted, you already paid some mana, required some setup, but really, as soon as you get that first one in the graveyard, this card is nuts. I love the instant speed flexibility, being able to leave up counter spells in the control decks. I love how it works with blue-red in the blue-red spells deck, even blue-green in that draw second card per turn archetype. This is a card that I first played in a deck after I got one 15th pick, and my 3 copies of Frantic Inventory in that deck ended up being a huge part of the reason I was able to trophy. So big fan of this card as well. This is something I wish I could include in cubes, but of course the singleton rule kind of gets you there. So yeah, that's my signature spellbook. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, but the main reason that I made this is because I want to see what you guys have. What are your favorite cards, your favorite memories with cards that other people underrated, things that did well for you in particular, even just silly cards that you had a really awesome time with. So for that, I have a Discord also linked in the description of this video if you want to pop in there, talk a little bit about your signature spellbook. I think that'd be awesome. If you want to mention something in the comments, that's great too. But yeah, thank you for watching this, and I'll see you again soon.